Okay, Chris Pick's here today with author, Kennedy assassination researcher Fred Litwin. He's been on several times. We've had numerous conversations regarding probably, I guess, to most people, a little known aspect of the case, the New Orleans connection, which is probably one of my favorite ones to research it or to read about. Um, Fred knows he's like an encyclopedia on it. For those who don't know, I don't think there's any detail I can. Fred doesn't know. I can ask him something so obscure, and he will know everything about it. I don't know how he retains that knowledge. It's uh, sad to me how some of the people treat Fred because they hack him. He gets called now. Like, Nick's one of his nicknames in some of the groups, and they can never refute anything that Fred puts up because everything he has is so impeccable research. There's no way you can refute any of it. Fred, how are you, man?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Really having a good summer. Just finishing up my next book, and so that's actually quite a lot of fun.
Now, which one is what's this going to be about?
This is going to be it's going to be called Heritage of Nonsense: Jim Garrison's Tales of Mystery and Imagination. And I'm going to
And
include, well, basically, my book on the Trail of Delusion. I not only told the Clay Shaw story, I told a variety of other stories about Jim Garrison. So I told the story of Clyde Johnson. I told the story of Edgar Eugene Bradley. There's a whole variety of other stories. And I have so many stories now about Jim Garrison that I've had to write another. This book will have 9 more stories about crazy conspiracy nonsense from Jim Garrison.
yeah, so these stories, how do you go to the National Archives and his papers?
Yeah, I've been to the National Archives 5 times. I've been to the Library of Congress 3 times. I've been to New Orleans twice to the New Orleans Historical, which has a variety of papers, including Irvin Diamond's papers, which was Clay Shaw's trial attorney.
I think
I've
those
been
are.
to Baylor University to look at Gus Russo's papers. I've been at Boston University to look at James Kirkwood's papers, who wrote a great book about the New Orleans case. So I've been wherever I can to find primary Garrison documents.
Okay, that's great. Um, and just before I forget, the papers are his collections. Uh, they were donated by his son. Was that to the National Archives? Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what was that?
His personal collections weren't they donated by his son to the National Archives?
Jim Garrison's papers were donated to the archives.
Okay. Um, today we're going to talk about probably one of the greatest characters of a movie that I've ever seen. Some people will probably think he's real, but the Willie O'Keefe character in the Kennedy assassination, the man who ties Shaw to Perry and the Cubans and the assassination. Um, what do we know about Willie O'Keefe, Fred? He was a mixture of several characters, right?
Well, Willie O'Keefe is the character in Oliver Stone's movie JFK. He is the gay hustler who Garrison meets in prison, who talks to Garrison about what's going on with Clay Shaw and David Ferry, and sort of gives him a little lecture on how to think about things that are going on in New Orleans, and then sort of makes a bit of a pass at Jim Garrison. And it's a lovely, lovely, beautiful character played by Kevin Bacon. I mean, very beautiful guy. So I kind of like that scene. But the character himself, Willie O'Keefe, is a composite character based on 4 people. So it's based on the real life Perry Russo, who was the person who testified against Clay Shaw at his trial. It's based upon David Logan, William Morris, and Raymond Brochures, who are 3 gay people who may or may not have had any relationship with David Ferry or Clay Shaw. In the case of Raymond Brochures, um, clearly he might have met David Ferry, but I don't think so. Certainly never met Clay Shaw. And the other 2 men are even very, very nebulous. So Oliver Stone took these 4 people and put them into one person and created something very, very fictional.
Now, I think you said three were gay. So, uh, was one straight, or we don't know about the other one's sexuality?
Hard to say. I mean, first off, I mean, we don't know that much about a couple of the people. David Logan was one of the people that this character was based on. All we have from David Logan is one interview that he gave with James Alcock in Garrison's office. We have the transcription of that one interview. They were supposed to speak again, but to my knowledge, we don't know if they ever did because this is all that survived. And Logan was a young guy. I think he was gay, who basically met Clay Shaw at a party, and David Ferry was at the same party, but he never says that they actually met, that they were together. They weren't together. There's no indication that Clay Shaw and David Ferry were together at all. They were just attended the same party, and that's all we have. And so that's why I don't think we see that much more from David Logan. He might still be alive. I've thought about, could I find this guy?
Yeah.
He's young enough, he could be around, but there's too many David Logans, and I just sort of gave up.
Let me ask you this: how did they come in contact with David Logan?
I don't know how, he may have contacted them. I don't know. I'd have to go back to the one interview, but
Uh,
again, we just don't know that much about David Logan. The
um,
other person is William Morris.
uh,
William
hold
Morris, William
on.
Morris was a prisoner. And, many, many prisoners wrote Jim Garrison, I guess hoping that basically he would help them with their case or help them get out of prison or reduce their sentence if they cooperated. So he contacted Garrison and they sent an investigator to prison to interview William Morris. And again, he knew Clay Shaw. And basically, I mean, where it got really ridiculous was that he actually claimed that he saw Jack Ruby at Clay Shaw's apartment.
Um, so now these, I guess Logan and this guy, they didn't testify at the grand jury or anything like that, right?
No, Logan and William Morris did not testify anywhere else. There was a few memos. We have the one interview with William Morris as well. We also have a few memos written about what he was saying and other. He thought that he said that he knew Eugene Davis, who denied it, and there's just a few errors in William Morris's interview that makes one very, very suspicious. Raymond Brochures was brought to New Orleans. Raymond Brochures is a very interesting case because he went on a television show in Los Angeles in 1967, and he claimed that he channeled Lee Harvey Oswald in a seance. And Oswald, of course, told him that he was innocent, and Garrison's men were listening to this. They watched this, and Brochures, they had actually known about him. He claimed that he was David Ferry's roommate in New Orleans. And so Mark Lane went to visit him along with Steve Burton, who was a Garrison and a volunteer out in Los Angeles. And they decided it might be a good idea and Steve Jaffe was also involved, it might be a good idea to bring Raymond Brochures to New Orleans. So they brought him to New Orleans for a week and interviewed him 4 different times. And we have the transcripts of all those 4 interviews. And Brochures told all these stories. He knew everybody. He knew David. He was David Ferry's roommate. He knew Clay Shaw. He knew Kerry Thornley. He slept with everybody. He slept with Oswald. He slept with Kerry Thornley. He slept with everybody, and just weaved all these stories. He knew he knew the plotters. He knew who carried out the assassination. He claimed that David Ferry was supposed to fly them out of Houston to Mexico and then on to South Africa, and that didn't happen. They missed the connection. He told so many stories that I think at some point they realized, this guy is completely off his rocker. At the same time, while he was in New Orleans, he was clearly having a good time visiting the gay bars, and according to Harold Weisberg, got himself arrested. Don't know much about that, except that he got off, of course, and then went back to Los Angeles. I'm actually writing a chapter about Raymond Brochures in my next book. He's a fascinating character.
Um, and I've heard this too. Is there some rumors that he was in the kids?
Raymond Rochers?
Yeah.
I don't know if he was into kids. I think he was into younger guys, but
Okay.
I don't know if he was into
Right.
kids.
Right.
I think he
I'm
was into, he actually ended up being a gay rights activist in San Francisco, quite a militant one, and actually set up a variety of police patrols to watch the police and keep people safe. But he wasn't that well liked by the rest of the gay community. They felt that he told stories and couldn't be trusted, and so he wasn't that well liked. But a very interesting character, who, by the way, threatened the life of Lyndon Johnson in 1965.
I don't think I've ever heard that.
Yeah.
Now wasn't he some type of minister as well?
Well, he claimed to be a minister. I don't think he actually was a minister, but he wore a priest collar. So it was always Reverend Raymond Brochures, but I don't think he was a real reverend.
All right, so I got one more question about those three because I haven't covered those. Do you think that Garrett? I mean, Garrison called some witnesses that were just awful, but do you think these guys were just such horrible witnesses that they just said we just can't call these guys to the stand?
Yeah, I think they realized all three of these guys, except for Perry Russo, but the other three were completely unreliable. And I mean, Brochures would have made a horrible, horrible witness. He would have embarrassed them greatly. And I think Logan didn't see. I mean, Logan, again, all he said was Shaw and Ferry were at the same party at the same time, but they weren't together. So I don't know whether he would have added much. William Morris did say that Clay Shaw was Clay Bertrand, but he said he saw Jack Ruby at Clay Shaw's apartment, and again, he was a prisoner, and the question is whether he was even there. I mean, there's just there would have been too many questions, so the Garrison couldn't have called him.
Okay, so Perry Russo, would you say that he is the star witness of the case against him against
Yeah, I mean,
Clay?
he was Garrison's star witness, and I guess because Garrison didn't have that much to work with. But Perry Russo to me is a very tragic character because he got involved in the case because right after David Ferry died, Russo was living in Baton Rouge, and he
Mhm.
saw a notice of David Ferry's death in the newspaper, and he knew David Ferry. They were friends for a little while, and so he decided to get in touch with Garrison. He claimed to have written a letter to Garrison, but that letter never turned up. But that day that Ferry's death, Russo went to the press in Baton Rouge. He went to the TV stations and he went to the newspapers to tell his story that he knew David Ferry, but he said nothing about any party at David Ferry's with Lee Harvey Oswald there and Clay Shaw. He didn't say that at all.
Now, why do you think he went to just interject himself in that? Like, hey, I knew Ferry. To fame or
Yeah, I think. Well, I think. Yeah, look, I think he knew David Ferry. He actually for a while, but not that well. But he knew David Ferry. He actually had tried to get David Ferry away from one of the teenage boys that he was after, and I think that actually Ferry wasn't happy about that. But I think
he was?
look, he wanted to. I don't think there was any particular reason. He knew something. He went to the papers. I don't think he counted on the Garrison people. They were wolves, and he was sort of this sheep, and I don't think he was ready for the fact that they were going to come after him, and they were going to put him through the grinder, and he was going to come out the other end, sort of a crazy witness.
Now you said that he tried to get a boy from Ferry. Was he trying to get the boy away for his own interest, or because he thought that
No,
Ferry
I
should?
think that Ferry was involved with Al Landry, who was, I don't know if he was 16 or 17, and Landry's parents wanted to break up this relationship, and I think Russo played a part in helping to break up the relationship.
All right, so what also happened next? Did Garrison go contact him? Because I know that he was an insurance salesman, and didn't he stop by Shaw's house?
Well, that came later. So I mean, first,
I forgot what happened.
I mean, basically, Russo went to the press, so Garrison learned about Russo from the Baton Rouge press, and so they sent Andrew Chambra to Baton Rouge to interview him. And so he interviews Perry Russo and decides, well, we should bring this guy to New Orleans.
Now he
And
never
so,
mentioned Shaw during the interview.
no, never mentioned Shaw. And then they brought him to New Orleans, and all he would say was that he said that he had met Shaw twice. Once at David Ferry's filling station, because David Ferry owned a gas station, and once when Kennedy came to visit Nashville in 1961, I think, or came to New Orleans, and they saw him down. He saw Clay Shaw down when Kennedy was visiting. That was
There's
it.
a, when they brought him there, then to interview him in New Orleans, then he admitted doing Clay Shaw.
Yeah, he said he saw Clay Shaw twice.
Now, when you said that about the filling station, I remember recall that. Is that when he said that Clay Shaw was driving a car, and a car Shaw never drove, or was that somebody else that
No,
said
Shaw
that?
did drive a car. Shaw had a Thunderbird back in the early
Oh, did he?
60s for a while.
Okay.
But that wasn't him who talked about Shaw driving. That was somebody else.
Okay. I think I'm mistaken. Shaw didn't fly, right? Shaw took
Yeah, he
train.
he he didn't like to fly. He did fly occasionally, and towards the end of his life, he flew a little more often, but he did not like to fly. So, for instance, in November 1963, when Shaw was invited to go speak in San Francisco, he took the train from New Orleans to San Francisco.
Hmm. Okay, so they had these two interviews. Which is Shaw. Um, what did they do
Russo.
that? Or excuse me, Russo. Um, um, did they go? Because I know at some point they put him under the truth serum.
Yeah,
Is
so
that when
they had an interview where they injected him with sodium pentothal.
now was that
And
Garrison's idea, or did Russo mention that?
I think it was, well, I think Russo might have mentioned that maybe that would help him, but Garrison was very, very amenable, and Garrison liked True Serum. And then after the True Serum, they hypnotized Russo 3 times. And we have the transcripts from 2 of those sessions. There was one session that supposedly the hypnotism didn't work, or he regressed too far back, and we don't have a transcript of that. Who knows what really went on? And in fact, I've uploaded onto YouTube one of the hypnosis sessions where you
Is
can
that on your
actually
channel
listen
you
to
got
it.
now?
I'm sorry?
Is that on your channel about Charles
Yeah,
Delusion?
yeah,
Okay, because I've been
yeah.
watching some of those. That's an excellent channel you got.
So, um, so they basically what happened was that they really implanted this memory of this meeting at David Ferry's house with Lee Harvey Oswald, where they all talked about killing Kennedy, and Shaw was there as Clay Bertrand. Russo sort of screwed up a bit in the telling of the story because he referred to Bertrand as Clem Bertrand. And Dean Andrews had never referred to Bertrand as Clem Bertrand. It was always Clay Bertrand. Now they had to say, well, maybe his name was also Clem Bertrand. And so whenever somebody talks about Clem Bertrand, I know it stems right from Perry Russo's interview. But if you read the transcripts of those sessions, you could see that they were the ones that brought up this party first. And Russo went along with it. And so it was a fake memory that they sort of implanted. And I don't know whether Russo was really hypnotized or whether he just went along with it.
Now, if I recall right, when I read about this, and it's been a long time ago, that whoever was hypnotizing, or that they was telling something like, picture you're watching it, looking at a TV, and then they started. Was there a man there, white haired man, and they started like just describing Clay Shaw and describing the people who was there and describing uh, the story of the plot of killing Kennedy. Is that how basically how it happened? Or
Yeah, I mean, you can read the transcripts on my website, but basically they sort of said, well, you're at a party, and there's the 3 people at the party, and they're talking about killing can, they really they describe the scene in great detail before they ask him about it, and so it's pretty clear that they're implanting or informing Russo the kinds of things that he should talk about or agree to, and it's just telling when you read the transcript.
now, I mentioned this earlier. I thought we get to it. When did they actually send him to Shaw's house? And I think it was posed as an insurance salesman. And what was the reason for that?
Well, they wanted a positive identification of Shaw as being the person in that party. And so they basically had Russo go to Shaw's house with a detective and pretend to be an insurance salesman. And Shaw answered the door and said he didn't need insurance. And then Russo said, well, that's the guy. That's the guy who was at the party. And then they proceeded to go and arrest Shaw.
Okay. And I'll ask one thing for people who don't know, I remember thinking about Clint Bertrand, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, they called the mailman to the stand during the trial, and he admitted that he had delivered mail to this address as Clint Bertrand. And then on the cross, they asked him, "Have you ever delivered mail to this person, this address, and this address?" And he kept saying, "Yeah," and then, yeah, and he never delivered any mail to those people. Is that how that went? That
Yeah,
trial?
basically, they caught him on the cross-examination in the trial where he admitted, he said, yeah, I delivered mail to all these fictitious people. I should also say that part of the reason that he might have testified against Clay Shaw was his son was in trouble with the law. And so he may have done this in the hope of getting a better treatment from Jim Garrison for his son.
Okay, so we go to the what grand jury. Did I'm used Perry Russo testified there? Did he give the same story there?
Yeah,
Did he go?
I mean, I think he sort of gives the same. The problem is that he sort of gives the same story, but in the grand jury and I can't remember, and then the trial, he basically admits, well, it really wasn't a conspiracy that we're talking about. It was like a bull session. We weren't really, he just sort of continually contradicts himself that this was some sort of planning session for the assassination. And what is really astounding about his testimony is that he sort of says he doesn't really know David Ferry's politics. Then
Oh
actually
wow,
didn't know whether Ferry was anti-Castro or pro-Castro.
huh?
And and I'm like, if you're friends with David Ferry, you would certainly should know that he was, vehemently anti-Castro.
Absolutely.
That was a huge issue for David Ferry.
Okay. So and, I know what. How did? If you ever read, um, when he first gave his testimony, they mentioned how the jury reacted. Were they receptive? They believed him, or they thought this was
Well,
a
I don't know
lie?
how the jury felt about individual testimony, but clearly the jury never found the whole case credible at all. And I think again, what really got the jury was, I think, the testimony of Charles Spiesel. And
Yeah, yeah,
Charles
yeah.
Spiesel was this accountant who came in dressed, in a three-piece suit and told the same, almost the same story as Perry Russo, that he went to a party with Clay Shaw and David Ferry, and they talked about the assassination. It's the same story. I mean, wow, could you imagine these plotters are always going to parties talking about the assassination? I mean, who would do that? But they caught him on cross-examination because Charles Spiesel was slightly crazy, and he claimed that the police and the FBI and other people had been trying to hypnotize him for 16 years, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He was just completely off his rocker. But I
Did he
think,
fingerprint his daughter?
yeah, when his daughter would go to university, he'd fingerprinted her. So when she would come back from university, he would check the fingerprints to make sure she was the same person.
I'll ask you one
I think what
thing.
really must have gotten the jury was that the fact he told the same story, a party, and it's the easiest story to say. Oh yeah, I'm at a party and they talked about the assassination. I mean, I
Uh,
mean, it's just I think didn't make much sense.
so, on cross examination, how did Lee Diamond handle Russo? Did he go after him? Did he attack his credibility? Did he handle him with kid glove?
Yeah, I think I mean, he went after him and trying to attack his credibility and attack, why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you go to the Warren Commission? Why didn't you go to the FBI? I mean, they're talking about the assassination right in front of you. You kept your mouth shut until now. What's going on? And all Russo could say was, well, I was busy at school. It didn't occur to me. I was busy. And so I think that sort of also got to people like, come on, you're at the planning session of the assassination, and it's not important enough to tell the FBI. And after the fact, after the assassination, did he not go to David Ferry and say anything? Hold it. You guys were talking about the assassination and then Kennedy was killed? Like, what's going on there? Didn't say a word to David Ferry, didn't mention it. I mean, it just, every aspect of this just didn't make sense. But Russo was not going to, you weren't going to get Russo on the stand to admit it that he was making this all up. But you could damage his credibility. And of course, afterwards, after the trial, Russo actually visited Shaw's attorneys for a series of interviews where he basically admitted, yeah, there's nothing there. It's all made up, and he really came clean and started telling all the stories about Jim Garrison.
And in his later life, didn't he change his story again and say it was all true?
Who was?
Didn't he change his story again later in life and say it was
Well,
all true?
he was, yeah, Sonny was always, I mean, I think Perry Russo would tell you what you wanted to hear. So I think if you were a supporter of Jim Garrison, he would tell you it's all true. If you were not a supporter of Jim Garrison, he would tell you it's all bullshit. I think he would tell people what they wanted to hear, and he was a weaver. He liked to tell stories, and I think he was always very happy talking about it. But he could never go all the way and claim, oh yeah, I made it all up. He all he would do is say, well, yeah, really, I don't think it really was Clay Shaw, but he would never admit that the party was made up.
So let me ask you this right here. Like I said, there's no evidence that Clay Shaw was involved with any of these men. Now, the character Willie O'Keefe, they portray him as, male prostitutes in jail and this right here, and they have like weird sex scenes. Did you think they made that character to further the character assassination of Clay Shaw?
Well, I think it furthered the whole gay aspect because they pictured Willie O'Keefe, and in fact, if you look at the words from Willie O'Keefe, he talks about the meeting at David Ferry's house as a meeting of the gay underground.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's this underground system of gay people who are plotting. It's gay plotters. And so it's incredibly homophobic because all this gay stuff comes out. You see David Ferry and Clay Shaw at an orgy, an S&M orgy in the film. This is all ridiculous.
Well, I read and phrase that right. They didn't portray Will O'Keefe as a gay or a man who was like an insurance salesman and stuff like this. They portrayed him like this. Almost like um, guy who's sleeping with everybody. Somebody with low morals instead of somebody else. So I was just wondering if they was doing that to try to further the character assassination of Shaw, because even if you watch those movies, watch the movie, why they inserted those scenes with them watching that weird thing with the men were throwing a ball back or a tug of war or something, and had them dressed up as a woman, and it just, I don't know why they put that in there. I guess it was just a character assassination because, and Mark Lane said that he thought it was horrible to put that in the movie. But okay, so the next question I have with Willow, and the reason I asked that is because when Diamond was cross-examining. Now, at that time, for people who don't know, nobody was going to come out and be openly gay. It would just kill your career and everything else. So obviously, Shaw was not open about it. In the cross-examination, Diamond says, this man is convicted of pandering and solicitation. he is a confessed homosexual. He has lied about everything, and now wants to be taken at his word. So that's his way of trying to discredit
I
Garrison's
don't think he
case.
said anything about Russo being a open homosexual. I don't think.
I mean, what he said to the Willie character.
In what?
Now, when he said that to the Willie O'Keefe character, he did not say that in the
Yeah, not in the
to
not
Russo.
in real life. I don't think homosexuality really was mentioned in the trial in the sense that Andrew Chamber's memo, um, initial memo about Russo was read, and Russo did mention homosexual. It mentioned Shaw being a homosexual.
Um, when that aspect of the case, did they know that Russo was homosexual?
Pretty sure they knew. I'm pretty sure they knew. I mean, how could they not know? I mean, he was it was pretty clear.
Um, why do you think there was a way they could have brought that up in the cross examination or so? That because that would, some people might find that as damaging to Shaw the way he was looked at the time, or was that something they did want to steer clear of, protect Russo?
Well, I don't think.
I mean, that's kind of a tough one.
There were two things going on in the trial. I mean, first off, Diamond had some sort of information about Garrison that he used to make sure that Garrison didn't bring up homosexuality. I don't know what it is, but
Was that about him?
he had some information that he used to threaten Jim Garrison.
Could that possibly been that thing about him and the kid at the New Orleans men's athletic club?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a bit.
Could that possibly have been the thing about him and the kid at the New Orleans athletic club?
That may have come later. I don't know. All I know is that Irvin Diamond told James Kirkwood we had some information, and then he said, "Turn off the tape recorder. I'll tell you what it is." And Kirkwood turned off the tape recorder, and we just don't know. And Kirkwood never said, and then he died. So we don't know. All we know is that Diamond had something on Jim Garrison, and so Jim Garrison was only obliquely mentioning homosexuality, and of course Diamond didn't want to really mention homosexuality. It did come up in the trial because they talked about Perry Russo had talked about Clay Shaw wearing tight pants. Tight
Oh yeah,
pants
I remember
being
that.
a euphemism for gay people. Gay people wore tight pants, and so Diamond would ask people, "Did Shaw ever wear tight pants?" And which he hadn't because he was a fairly conservative dresser.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Though that would not strike me from everything I've read about him that he would not be in tight pants. That just I would not have believed that. Um, and for people don't know, Perry Russo actually had a cameo in the movie JFK. He was at the bar, clapping what do you say? Let's give I'm glad he killed the son of a bitch, or they ought to give him a medal, or something like
Yeah,
that. It was,
yeah, he's in that little scene where Garrison goes to the bar to watch the coverage of the assassination, and Perry Russo is there, sort of jubilant that Kennedy had been killed. Um,
and I think Russo died not too long after that, right? He didn't live a long life.
he died. When did he die? He died in the 90s, I think, 1990 something.
I
He
think
was
like
a fairly
95.
young man. He was in his 50s when he died.
Um, so just got one quick question. Do you know what happened to Russo after the trial?
Russo ended up being a taxi driver. So he made his money
Okay.
driving a taxi, and supposedly, once a year he would get together with Jim Garrison to reminisce and stuff. But and he would tell, he would regale people with stories. He was always available to be interviewed. He would talk to anybody. Patricia Lambert interviewed him for her book, and lots of other people have interviewed him. And he was always telling stories. He told stories about Oliver Stone to Patricia Lambert, which I have not put in my book or on my blog.
in his interviews with these people, did he stick with the story about the meeting with Shaw?
You know, he basically, again, the big interviews were the ones he did with Irvin Diamond and with the Wegmans at their office, where he basically said it wasn't Shaw. Shaw wasn't there. And he was very sorry he got involved in all this stuff. And he told lots of other stories about Jim Garrison.
Um,
I think he deeply regretted, bringing Shaw into this.
why do you think he did it? Just for 15 minutes of fame?
I think he got in too deep with Garrison. That he got in with Garrison, and Garrison used these techniques, and he
Right.
wanted to please Garrison. I think he was promised some money as well. He wanted to please Garrison, and went along, and then realized. I think after first off, it went along. He was told, by the way, by Garrison, "You're not the only witness. We've got lots of other evidence against Shaw, so you're not the only person." And then it turns out he was basically the only person. And so I think that was a bit of a shock to him, that the whole case rested on his shoulders. And
Um,
and that was a burden I think he didn't really want.
do you think that Garrison used may have threatened him with that tactic that if you don't tell the story to the grand jury, I'm going to charge you with perjury, like he did with other people?
Well, he did eventually threaten Russo. Every time Russo sort of had second thoughts, Garrison would like, okay, let's get back on track. Because if you don't get back on track, we'll all go after you. And then, and of course, Russo, like everybody else, knew that Garrison had a lot of power. People were scared of Garrison, and so I think that was part of it too. It was like, I better keep to my story, and everything will be okay.
So you don't really think Russo was really a bad person out to get him? He just kind of got caught up into this and was trying to save himself.
Yeah, I think he unfortunately got caught up with some really evil people who were only too willing to sort of grind him up and use him for their purposes, and he wasn't strong enough to sort of say no, I can't do this, and he just went along with it. And so I sort of feel sorry for him in a way, but I can't feel totally sorry for him because he helped to indict a very innocent man and help ruin somebody else's life.
Did Russo ever try to cash in on his story, like so many others?
Not
Because I've
really,
heard,
but I
like,
mean, I think he did expect some money from Garrison and never got paid that money. He got a lot of expense money and a lot of dinners, but I think he expected more but didn't get it. And then he never cashed in. He never wrote a book. Um, what
I
could he
guess if he
say?
would probably if he would have stuck to the story, do you think it would have been more um, easy to sell? Hey, this guy is the one that had them all together. But when he recants the story and it happened, it kind of takes all the luster off of it. So,
I think the problem for Russo is that you can stick to the story, but over time, as more and more evidence comes up about Garrison, it gets harder and harder to stick to that story, and you become to look more and more crazy. And I think I think I'm sure he probably was tired of it. Like I think he wanted to escape from Garrison and escape from the story and not think about what had happened to Clay Shaw.
um, I was got Perry Russo. Uh, what was on it? That cashier. Oh God. Yes, I'll come back to him. Um, oh yeah. So, do you think that had Russo never got involved, or the story wasn't able to plant the story in his mind about this meeting? Do you think that Shaw would have ever went to trial? Because this without this star witness, they don't have this stuff. That would he have ever had enough
Yeah, I
to
think
get
that's a good question.
him
I
indicted?
don't think without this story, they had to have this story because without the story, they actually had absolutely nothing. And so this was the story. They needed this story. And this fused, I mean, this story fused the David Ferry story into the Clay Bertrand story. So there were those two stories fused through Perry Russo was very important. And without this story, they really had nothing. You're on mute. Chris, I can't hear you.
There was a chance that there may have been a hung jury in this case or conviction without Speecel if it hung surely on Russo's testimony.
Possibly, it's hard to say. Clearly, I think Russo, Speecel was the guy who tipped it, but I don't know. It's hard to say that they could have convicted him. I mean, you never can tell in these cases, and I think that's why it was so nerve-wracking for Clay Shaw was that you're an innocent man, but the jury might convict.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because you never know what a jury's going to do, and
You never know.
yeah, and never know what a jury's going to do, and because I was, so I think I heard that one of Garrison's attorneys or what investigators said that they thought that Speecel was the one that totally ruined their case, where they had no chance at all from that point.
That is true. That really did show everybody this is all ridiculous.
And didn't I don't want to go far. Didn't Garrison's people, these lawyers, who's prosecuting, when they started cross examination, it was like a punch in the mouth. They had no idea that Speecel did this.
Speecel told the press that they knew about him. That Garrison's men knew about his background, and there was no secret. I think they knew, but they decided that the defense would not find out, and it was worth the gamble to put him on the stand.
So now you said Russo went and talked to Shaw later in life.
He talked to Shaw's attorneys.
Okay, but he never. Okay, I thought. Okay, I must misunderstood you. I thought
Yeah.
he met with
Yeah,
Shaw later.
there were like a series of 3 or 4 interviews. I had them on my website, but he went to lengthy interviews, very interesting interviews.
And he admitted that everything was false.
Well, he wouldn't say it was false. He would just say it wasn't, it wasn't Clay Shaw. There was a party. He wasn't going to back off from the party, although he would certainly back off. There was no conspiracy or anything like that. But he would sort of give his regrets at ever getting involved, and he would say it wasn't Clay Shaw.
Okay. Or a couple questions on the nation. We'll cut count typing, but is there anything else you think people should know about Perry Russo?
Well, I've got an awful lot of material about Perry Russo on my website, on my blog, and you could read all of his statements in Baton Rouge before he got involved with Garrison, and then you could read the interview with after sodium pentothal, the first interview with Russo, the hypnosis sessions. It's all on my blog, and you could see more. His post interviews with Garrison, with Shaw's attorneys. Just go to my website and click on Perry Russo on the tags. There's a lot of information there.
Yeah, so I'll start going to that because when I was so deep in the New Orleans thing, I think there's a website called JFK Online or something, and that's where I read about the hypnosis and put it in there.
That's David Reitz's website, JFK-Online. It's a terrific website. A lot of great material about Garrison on there, and so I strongly urge people to go there as well.
Yeah, because he has like 100 things to raise it, and that's where I found
100 errors in the movie JFK.
And that's where I started reading the trial transcripts of this.
Yeah, it's a really good website.
Well, okay, Fred, thanks a lot, man, and I really enjoyed this, and let's do it again soon.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Stop recording.